Hey there, how's it going, everybody? Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I've been struggling the past few days to pick out a new project to start. I've done a few small paintings, but nothing very um, substantive, I guess is the best word to use. But I finally figured out what I wanted to do, and it's I'm kind of going. We tend to, as artists, when we're struggling, we tend to go back to what we're familiar with. So I decided to challenge myself a little bit, but also get back into that familiarity that I was talking about. Um, and I'm going to tackle a portrait today. So this is it's going to actually be a multi-day project, which is not a big deal. Almost every painting I do is a multi-day project, but this one in particular is going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to be painting a German Shorthaired Pointer. I love painting dogs. Specifically, I love painting pointers. I love painting beagles, labs. So they're just gorgeous animals, and it's always a pleasure to get to paint in a situation where you have a beautiful animal that's just perfect for a portrait setting. So we're going to tackle this today. Again, it's going to be probably done over a few different sessions, at least two, maybe three. We'll kind of see how that goes, but I hope you guys enjoy it. I'll try to talk you through some of my steps throughout the video, but get ready, sit down, grab you maybe a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, and let's get to painting. Once again, I'm starting this project, as I do almost all of my paintings. I'm using an oil primed linen canvas. This is actually a Masterpiece Pro canvas. If you're curious about the brand, I tend to like their drum tight stretch is just really unparalleled, and then just the quality of the product's just really nice. And there's other reasons. I may do a review at some point on the Masterpiece Pro canvas, but that's what I like to use. I did pre-tone it several weeks before starting this painting, and you can tell it's still got all the brush strokes in the original toning, but that's a very thinned out layer, so it doesn't have any ridges on it. It just appears as though it's got a ton of brush strokes, but it's very flat, ready for this animal portrait. I'm using only 6 colors for this first session: titanium white, burnt sienna, Van Dyke brown, and ultramarine blue. I've also got cad red deep and cad yellow deep. So this is a very minimal palette. You don't have to get crazy with colors very often to get a desired effect. I'm basically on this particular session only going to be using 2 brushes. One is a Da Vinci Maestro brush, and the other is just a script liner. The first stroke of any portrait, for me at least as an artist, is probably the most difficult, and I think that comes from a lack of patience. if I'm absolutely honest, and I think I carry that into almost every painting I do for some reason. I want to see the end product, and I want to see it now. And sometimes I have to sit down and kind of remind myself to enjoy living in the moment of painting that individual stroke, because that's what I enjoy, and I think that's what most of you enjoy is the process of painting, not just the end product, which is somewhat superficial if you're not in any way attempting to care about the process itself. So I catch myself doing that though too. So it's not unusual. It's fairly normal to want to just see that end product. But particularly with a portrait piece like this, we have to be very patient about the process. Because it's not going to get done in one stroke. This is just the first session, and this is going to take a while to get this base coat of this dog painted. And I do want to mention that everything you're going to see over the next hour and a half, or however long I work on this, everything you see is simply the base coat of the dog. Now, there are going to be lots of areas where he's going to end up looking a lot like he will at the end of this process of this first session. And I won't go back over him too terribly much, but he will be refined. He's not going to be a finished portrait of a dog at the end of this first session. And I'm starting off here with some really dark tones, which is a bit unusual for me on a portrait. Probably in a normal setting would start off with a bit more of a mid-tone, but with this one I wanted to lay in this dark color to separate it from that back toning that I had. Had I planned this out a little bit better, this canvas was not initially planned for this painting. Had I planned it differently, I would have probably toned it with a different color, and I could have gone back and done that anyway. I just decided to just go ahead and do it. I'm confident enough in my painting skills to be able to paint on just about any surface, but I do find it's very important to tone your canvas. It helps you in so many ways. So I don't want to get into the details of why that is yet, because that's in other videos that I've got. I'll try to maybe talk about that a little bit more in depth at a later time, but I do highly encourage everyone to pre-tone their canvas before any painting. My initial strokes are very loose but broad. I'm staying relatively within my initial sketch. Nothing wrong with sketching, folks. There are some people that are just adamantly against it, and I'll be very honest with you that early in my painting career, I did use an overhead, so that's not it's not unheard of to trace, and I don't want anyone to feel bad about that. I've gotten to a point now, and if you challenge yourself enough, you'll get to a point where you are very much able to do a freehand sketch, which is an amazing skill to have. So I encourage you to challenge yourself on that level. I do want to mention that part of the reason I don't explain to you guys what colors I'm mixing is because, first of all, you can't see on the palette how much of them I'm mixing, but also I kind of just do that by instinct. I've talked about that in other episodes of other painting demonstrations that I've done. I don't really carry a recipe book with me for color mixing. That's just sort of something that's developed through practice and repetition of just. I'm to a point now as an artist where I don't really have to think about it, is the main point I'm trying to make. I just go and what colors I have to use or what colors I have to use. I wish I could tell you guys that I had a rhyme or reason for the area of the dog that I start on first. I don't necessarily. If I had to kind of think about it post painting this video or post shooting this video of me painting, I would say I probably started on the head of the dog simply because it's the one that offers me the most reward early. So it gets me emotionally into the painting pretty quickly. So within the first hour, I'm already seeing results. You know, if I started on the bottom right leg, there's just not as much fun stuff there. So this gives me a chance to get emotionally involved in the painting very quickly and see those early results. So I just wanted to explain that and tell folks that you can start anywhere. You don't have to start where I'm starting with any portrait. Now, I don't obviously want you guys to try to do this exact painting, but use the process that I'm showing you to work on your own. You can use this same formula, these same broad strokes, there's no secret to it. It's a matter of looking at the color and painting the color. With this being a German Shorthaired Pointer, there's a lot of liver color here on this animal, but you can already tell I'm using some really dark tones for even areas of fur that would be liver colored. And the reason is because of light. Light is going to alter colors, and you're not what you look at a cloud and you think a cloud's white. Well, no, it's actually not. It's got orange in it. It's got sometimes it's got purple. Sometimes it's got Van Dyke brown. So you have to just play with colors. And as a painter, you need to train yourself to look at objects very differently than the rest of the world. Just because something is a certain color doesn't necessarily mean that that's how our eyes perceive it. As you can see, I'm starting a slight change of value at this point, but I'm keeping my colors still relatively neutral, somewhat grayed or toned down. Now, I'm not using black. There's no black on my palette, as you can see there. But part of the reason I'm doing that, the original photo that I have of this pointer that I took, the colors are much more vibrant in certain spots, and even in the spot that I'm painting right now, in this kind of the upper portion of his forehead, the colors are much more reddy or red toned than what I've got going on at the moment. But I don't want to get too wild with that. I want to keep it neutral. I can always go back over it later, and I probably will in a later session, and strengthen up some of these tones. But I want this to be a relatively neutral tone at the moment. I just don't want to get too much red involved in it yet. So this is kind of a cautious portion of this painting that I'm involved in now. And again, part of the reason I do this, I'm doing these videos so long, is so that you guys can see how much time I spend on my palette. There's half of the time that I spend on a painting spent on the palette. I think it's really not done on the canvas itself. But I'm continue to working in these deep colored areas for the most part, starting to really try to refine this ear a little bit more. This is still all just covering of canvas. Nothing at this point is detailed work. And if you get outside of a line, it's not a big deal. Don't get into that. It's actually better if you get out of it just a little bit, because that softens up those edges. You don't want too many hard lines in a painting. I tend to stay away from hard lines no matter what subject I'm painting, unless it's something really close up. I do like to soften my lines a bit. The only thing I think I've done to this point with the color, I've added a bit of ultramarine blue and a little bit of titanium white, and these are minuscule amounts. This paint's going a long way. I'm using, just to be clear with everybody, I'm using Gamblin oil paints. So this is a high quality paint. It's spreading very easily. I'm able to cover a lot of canvas with very little paint. And again, I'm working on an oil primed canvas with oil toning. So it's oil on oil, and that saves you paint. I'm going to let you guys just watch as I paint for the next few minutes. If you want to skip ahead and and don't want to sit through the silent painting process, then feel free to do so at this point. But because I'm not going to narrate for a few more minutes, but just wanted to give you guys a heads up that that I'm going to be just painting on this ear and the upper portion of the head for the next few moments. So just watch as I continue with broad strokes, slightly changing values here or there, and see the process take place. what I call the eyebrow of the dog is about to start going in. Now this is a very important spot because this is going to set up everything else in terms of the look and the feel, the overall gist of how this dog is feeling. Now you can see how the sketch is very happy, out in the field, just enjoying the day. But if I don't get this eye just right, then it could all disappear in a hurry. And this is the point where that process starts. So I'm going in with just keeping the shapes fairly broad. I know that seems kind of counterintuitive with a portrait process, but I don't want to get too hung up on staying inside lines. I just want to stay within my basic shape idea parameters, if that makes sense. I know that's a bit confusing, but I have a general area that I need to stay within now, and a general shape that I need to keep. It's more about the shape more than anything, but I don't want to water this down because it's not paint by numbers. It's far from that. There's no rule to it. There's no exact specification of where a color should start, where it should end, and I can change it depending on where I want the light to be. But this eye is a very, very important part, and I've kind of moved away from it now. I'm working again on the shadows. I tend to jump around. In most of my paintings, even in portrait work, though it almost accentuates that within my own skill level. I do jump around from piece to piece, and if you're wondering why that is, it's pretty simple. It depends on the color that I've got on my brush. If I finish a certain area and I don't see that color anywhere else, then I'm going to, or I don't see that color anywhere else in that specific spot, I'm going to try to pick out another place on the animal where that color does exist, and then I'm gonna drop that color in without having to go back to the palette. Although I do go back to the palette quite often. Now I lay in this initial kind of neutral tone right below the eye, knowing full well that later on I'm going to have to drop in some white in that spot to kind of lighten that and give it some depth. But at this point, I'm not worried about that. I just want to get the shape in, get it started. Again, I'd love to take a big giant paint roller and just roll it over this thing once or twice and have a perfect portrait. That's not how it works. It's extremely time consuming. I'm using a relatively small brush. Some artists may use larger brushes, but for me, I'm using a small brush because I like the. It's not that I'm trying to get super detailed, but I like the change of tone that I get in these little pockets. It's not like painting a tree, but you also want to have slight color changes everywhere. I goof a little bit on this next part, on the muzzle or the nose of the dog. Not the exact nose; it's more of the muzzle, the elongated portion of the snout that comes out. I get a little bit bowed with it. here in just a second after I lay this color on. And it may be a little bit later in the process when I lay in a secondary color that this takes place. But there's no worries. If you make a mistake on getting outside of your lines or creating a shape a bit off on the outside of the dog, it's not the end of the world because you're going to be painting over this around the outside of it. Which brings me to another point. There are some artists, and I even did this years ago when I was painting other animal portraits, and the last animal portrait I did the same thing that I'm about to tell you not to do, or I don't recommend doing anymore. I used to take whatever background I had. For instance, if this was going to be a grassy field, and I would lay that field in before I ever even sketched the dog out. I'm not doing that on this painting for a reason. I don't. If I paint the grass in the background, unless I really blend it and scrape off paint and just make sure it's really smooth, I'm going to end up with a lot of brush strokes that are going to end up in that dog. Does that make sense? In other words, if I paint grass behind that dog, those strokes will show through. Not the color, but the strokes. And to me, the shape of this animal, the fur pattern, is dictated by the stroke of my brush. Well, if I've already got brush strokes underneath that, that totally ruins any effect that I'm trying to go for. So I've got a couple of options. I can either sketch the dog out and then paint as close as I can to the line and maybe even get inside of it with the grass, or I can paint the dog first. I'm choosing to paint the dog first in this instance, just because I wanted to get started on the portrait piece, and I'm experimenting a little bit here with painting the grass separately. I've done that before. I've painted backgrounds around the edge of something before. The risk that I'm going to run with this painting, as you do with any painting that you do in this fashion, by painting the portrait subject in front first, rather than the background first, the thing that I'm going to risk is what I call, I don't know if other artists call it this or not, but I call it the halo effect. So you're going to end up painting around it, and you end up with this weird shape of almost like a halo around the entire shape of the dog. And I don't want that. So I'm going to have to really work hard in the background portion of this painting to make sure that I don't do that. If I happen to, while I'm painting the dog, if I happen to go over the dog a little bit, then I just let that dry, and then I come back over it and refine the dog in the final process. I hope I didn't confuse anybody with that, because I know that could get a little odd to try to think about. But if you paint the background first, once again, there's trade-offs either way, but if you paint the background first, you're going to end up, unless you really work hard at it, and you're going to end up getting brush strokes coming through that you don't want. If you do it the way I'm doing it now, you're going to run the risk of having the halo effect. So just know that going in, that this is not an easy thing to do. But don't let that deter you. I kind of want to give a little bit of background right now. I'm starting to work on some really detailed stuff here that's going to matter a lot towards the final product. So I do want you guys to pay attention to what I'm doing here. But I do want to kind of give you a little bit of a background story about how I got into portrait work, because when I first started, I was strictly landscape. I didn't try animals. I didn't want to try animals. They were hard. People were hard. It was just too difficult, and I wasn't going there, But I did a painting probably about 6 months or so after I initially started back painting a few years ago. And I've told you guys about my history of how I got back into painting after college. I painted earlier, but when I got back into painting, I did a mountain scene that had a huge lake in it. It was on I think it was a 36 by 48 inch canvas. So it was a huge canvas. So this lake was really gorgeous. I liked it. Looking back on it, it was a terrible painting, but the lake needed something. And I wanted my best to try to put in a fisherman in a boat. So I found a picture of a fisherman in a boat online, and I didn't paint it like that. I painted it as a silhouette. And it actually turned out pretty well for a first effort. But that was the first time that I had risked an entire painting by putting an object, an animal, boat, anything, or a human into a painting. Before that, I just didn't go there. That was so high. That was such a high podium to reach that I didn't believe in my ability to do it. But I have, at this point, at that point in my painting life, I decided I needed to step forward a little bit. So that night, I decided to do it, and I painted this little silhouette of a boat with a fisherman in it. And I even painted a little ripple in the water where the line was going in the water. And that was a huge deal for me. Big time deal. So skip forward a few months, I get to Christmas, or a little bit before Christmas, and I'm looking for a unique present to give my father. And he's a pretty tough guy to buy for. So, I decide to try a portrait of him, and I used a really cheap 16 by 20 canvas. My parents still have this portrait that I did, but I look back on it, it's a terrible portrait. I used flesh tone right out of the tube. It was terrible. But, for a first effort, it was great. It really was great. And it gave me, the most important thing was, at that time, I didn't know it was bad. So it gave me confidence to keep trying harder. And then I tried another animal. I painted my dog, my beagle. He turned out really well, surprisingly. Dogs are actually easier to do than humans for me. May not be the same way for you. You're going to find different strengths that you don't know that you have. But the point I'm trying to get across is, if you challenge yourself, when you get to a point where you think, okay, I want to put this in there, but I can't because I'm not talented enough. Do it. Step out, give it a try. If it bombs, it bombs. You can scrap it. You can paint another one. You're only going to get better. You're not going to regress. Your skills are only going to get better with more practice. So don't be afraid. Just dive in, tackle it, and you will eventually, I promise you will eventually figure out what works for you. What I'm doing may not work for you, but if you challenge yourself, it will eventually work out. So that's my little spiel for challenging yourself, especially when it comes to portrait work. And it will help you tremendously to be able to paint portraits. You will sell some art because of that ability. The first commission I ever did was a portrait of a dog, portrait of a lab. I think I sold it for, I think it was an 18 by 24, similar to this size. But it was, I think I sold it for like $250, which was huge to me. Huge. I mean, some days it still is. But, yeah, it was a blast. Hey, I couldn't believe it. I got a commission. Someone saw my work and they thought it was decent enough that they were willing to pay me to paint their dog. I was extremely honored, still am, and I will always cherish that first commission. That's something that sticks with you. I remember my first sales, but they're a distant memory in some ways, even though they were probably closer to my heart even than that commission, because when you do a commission, a lot of times commissions are not something that you're extremely passionate about. The good thing for me was that commission I was passionate about because I love dogs. I haven't done a lot of them here on my YouTube channel, but if you follow me on Facebook or Instagram, you know that anytime I get to, if I get to take a photo of a lab or a pointer or a beagle or any kind of sporting dog, I take the chance. I love it. I actually did a painting for my wife back, probably last summer. She's got an English bulldog, and that was a lot of fun. That was a lot of fun to paint an English bulldog, and she's such a happy dog, and it was just each one of them has a different personality, and so it's your job as an artist to bring that out. My beagle is a very serious, stoic dog. He's always on the hunt for something. Loves squirrels, and but he's very serious. He's not a dog that smiles a lot. You know, dogs smile. They do. This one right here is smiling. You can kind of tell he's happy. And my wife's English bulldog is a smiler. She's as happy as a lark. But we have to, as artists, we have to nail that. We have to nail the personality of each animal. This part of the painting that I'm working on right now, in the original photo that I took, was super black. And I know it looks like I'm painting all out black right now, but there's no black in this at all. Again, I don't really use black ever. This is just ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. Making a slight value change at this point. This is still in shadow. You can kind of tell. I go back to the palette here because I didn't get the color just right. It's not the end of the world, though. It's important to remember that. It's not the end of the world if that first little dot you drop on there is not perfect. You can always change that. Oil paints are so malleable. You can go with them, mix them. That's why I love them. I'm just dropping in this little shadow area. There's a little bit more light coming through, which is part of the reason this little bit of liver color is lightening up a bit. This is obviously the neck area of the dog. So the shaping in here is very important. You can tell I'm using a side stroke now to drop this in. Still very broad as we're still just covering canvas. But I do want you guys to check this out. We're around 35 minutes in-ish into this painting, and you know, we've gotten a lot done, but it doesn't feel like it, doesn't look like it. So this is a, again, very labor-intensive process. Don't let that slowness get you down. Another slight value change. It was at this point in the painting process that I started to wonder a little bit if I was a little off on my colors. Not much, but just a hair. No pun intended. But I kind of just stuck with it. I always talk to you guys about working through it, especially when it comes to plein air painting. This one's in studio, obviously, so I have much more control, which was part of the reason I was disappointed at this point. I thought, I'm off, and I got perfect lighting, and I'm still not judging it correctly. Later on, I realized that no, I was spot on. I just wasn't trusting the process. This dog's going to have a lot of white, or kind of a peppery white on him, so that's going to change it a ton. When you put that white on there and it balances it out, man, this thing's going to just come alive. But up until this point, everything's been relatively dark toned. And I'm also not overloading my brush. I do want to be very clear about that. I don't have a ton of thick paint on the brush. I'm just trusting the fact that I've got oil paint, a high quality oil paint, and it's able to spread fairly easily. This is a very important spot that I'm working on now. If I don't get that shape right there, his whole face is messed up. Everything about him is wrong. So be very careful in that area. If you're painting any other dog, if they've got their mouth open like that, you've got to get the front of this snout correct. Don't panic if you don't get it perfect, because you can go back and repaint it. But it helps if you don't have to do that. It might help some of you if you're working in that type of an area to use a smaller brush just to give you a bit more confidence, but the snout's pretty white, but I don't want to rush the lighter tones. So I am going to start dropping in some lighter colors, but I'm still going to keep them relatively low risk is the best way to say this. That's an area that's going to be a transition spot, and while it is going to be there's going to be a lot of white in the front of his snout. I don't want to go crazy with white yet. There's just no reason to, because you can always lay white over on top. Even if you're painting a landscape, your whitest tones, your absolute strongest colors, need to come dead last. That's my opinion, but if you feel comfortable laying them in at this point, that's great. I don't. I like it. This gives me more control. I haven't tackled that eye yet, the actual eyeball, and I'm just part of the reason is I know ahead of time that the actual eye color of this dog is going to be very similar to the background tone. So I want to get what's really all around the area all around that eye painted first. And I also don't want to. I don't want to take the risk of muddying up the eye. If I painted the eye first and then I went around it with fur with a larger brush, it would inevitably get into the color of the eyeball, and I would have a mess on my hands. It might not be a large mess, but it would be enough of a mess to cause a problem. We talked about those white tones earlier. I'm going to take the brightness level up a notch here and continue working on this snout. And notice how I work on the edges. At this point, I'm keeping some pretty hard edges. And I'm not going to want that in the end. So there's going to be a little bit of blending that takes place, which I do have a specific brush that I use for blending. But I can use just this bristle brush that I'm using now. It's small enough, and I've got enough finesse about my hand that I can blend with it a little bit. And it's not so much a blend as it is just pulling colors together. Notice I'm doing a little bit of that here. Yeah, just kind of softening that line up a little bit. And this is a hard skill for some beginner painters. While I'm still not going wild with it, I am adding a little bit more of that true liver color that is so associated with the German Shorthaired Pointer. Here in just a second, that little area I'm about to make this stroke, but and it looks very similar to the color that's right next to it to the left, but it's slightly stronger. And I do this with a combination of a couple of colors that are in my repertoire on the palette. That includes the burnt sienna and the cad red deep and the cad yellow orange. Now I use more of the cad red deep, but if I want to bump up the orange level, I meant cad red yellow or cad yellow deep. I'm going to get it right here in a second. It gets confusing sometimes. Let me be clear. To make that liver color, I'm adding a little bit of cad red deep and a little bit of cad yellow deep. If I want to take up the orange notch a little bit, I can obviously mix the red and the yellow. But the cad red deep and the burnt sienna are the two main components of that liver color. And if you want to gray it a little bit, which is an awesome thing to do, I actually used a good bit of the graying element in this. Throw some ultramarine blue in there. I wouldn't use Prussian blue. on this. You would risk, it's so strong, so strong. Ultramarine blue is strong, but you could get yourself into some problems using Prussian blue here. Just for fun to get some shape going elsewhere on this animal, I'm going to start on the hind end, the tail area, and I've just got a nice dark color mixture here. You see me looking over to the side. I've got my reference material, the photo that I took, over to my right, so I can easily see it. If you're wondering what I'm always looking at to my right, you'll also notice this is something I don't mean to do, but you can see me right there. I turn my head backwards and forwards, or yeah, right there, just a really sharp angle turn. I don't know why I do that. That's just, it's always been an annoyance when I watch myself paint. I hate that about myself, especially being on YouTube, but I can't help it. When I'm painting, it just happens without me even knowing it. I take it that I'm trying to get a different look at it. You know, oil paint can have a sheen to it, especially under high light, and I do have a very bright light on my canvas, or several bright lights actually. So I do have a bit of a sheen in some places. Not a bad one. I mean, I can see what I'm painting, but I think tilting my head like that just gives me a little bit different perspective, and that's how I'm going to rationalize it. At least it could just be something weird about me. As I'm working on this large liver spot on the hind end of this German Shorthaired Pointer, I do want to mention that obviously I hope this is obvious, but to some people it may not be. So I want to make sure you realize this. Every single dog's color patterns are going to be totally different. So don't feel like you have to stay within these exact parameters if you're going to try to do this painting. You can. I recommend not trying to make up a dog. I recommend trying to get a photo. Go out. There's dogs everywhere, folks. Go out, get you a camera, use your iPhone, get a good picture of one, and try to replicate that. Replicate that pattern. You can change the colors a little bit, but every single dog is a little bit different. So you can play around with it, but just realize that you don't have to stick with my exact pattern that I'm doing here. As I work on this eye, you're not going to notice a ton of change with the initial process. Now, I'm sorry that my hand's blocking the shot here. I really couldn't help that with my camera set up in my studio today. I was filming this at night, so I had to have all my lights on, and that kind of dictated where I could have my camera. The only thing you'll notice, you're not going to see much of a difference other than the fact that the where the actual black portion of the eye is, that's been covered up now. I'm using almost an amber color for the eye. I did make a switch to a liner brush to paint the eye, and also I slightly thinned down the paint with just Gamsol. And I'm going to be putting in the black portion of the eye here in just a moment, and then obviously the slight white dot. I'm going to try to go ahead and get most of this eye done in this session. This is a relatively small canvas, so I can't get a ton of detail within the eye itself, but I can get enough that it's going to look really good. So, but I am using just a script liner brush. I believe it's a number 1. I like to use smaller most of the time, but this is what I I have one really nice script liner brush that I adore using. I just cannot get enough of it. But it happened to be packed up in my plein air kit, and I was lazy and just didn't want to get it out during this session. So I just pulled out one of my other liner brushes that I've got, because I've got 18 million of them. And this is the one I picked up, but it works fine. I probably got the eye done quicker with this one than I would have my other. And in just a second, I'm going to make that black dot a little bit larger. I didn't get it initially large enough, but I'm going to make it just a hair larger. And then when you put that final little twinkle, that little white spot in the eye, this pup's fixing to come alive. Any portrait work you do, I don't know what it is, but the eye is the soul. It's the picture into the soul of any creature that you paint, whether it be human, dog, bear. I don't care what it is, deer. That eye tells a lot of stories. For the little white twinkle in the eye, right there, you just saw it go in. That's super thin paint. You're thinking, well, would you be better off to paint that, you know, let those layers dry? Probably you could, but it doesn't make any difference if you are able to thin your paint out well enough and get it done by thinning rather than waiting. It saves me time, and I don't notice that much of a difference. There's other parts of this painting that I'm going to have to let dry. I'm not exclusively a dry on dry painter, and I'm not exclusively a wet on wet painter. I kind of like to mix the two. My philosophy when it comes to a painting is whatever works. All right, time to tackle this nose. Now, this is on a German Shorthaired Pointer, probably any dog, but on a German Shorthaired, it's extremely important that you get the colors accurate because they tend to dictate the color of the fur. From what I understand, I could be wrong about this. Somebody out there who knows more about German Shorthairs than I do can probably correct me on this, but the color of the nose really tells you as a puppy what color the rest of their coat's going to be, because some of them are all liver with no spots. Some of them have a little bit of liver spots, and then they're mixed with peppery colors. But the nose is going to tell you a lot as a puppy, because they obviously develop their fur a little bit later. But you have to work to get this nose the right spot-on color. And that's again, be careful. Don't think about the nose being the color of the fur. Think about how the nose is looks in real life according to where the light source is. But you want to get it right. It needs to look correct. The shaping of a nose on a dog is one of the harder things to do in portrait work. And when I say things are one of the hardest things to do, I want to be careful. I don't want to say that that's the hardest thing for everybody. It may not be. For me, it's the hardest thing, or one of the hardest things. Just please keep that in mind when I do say something is hard. I'm saying that's from my perspective. It may not be for you, and that, hey, if it's not, wonderful, man. Hey, great props to you, because some of this stuff is really difficult to do. And if I've got a follower out there who's got a better way or just feels more comfortable, then hey, I'm an admirer already. Of course, the nose looks a little flat right now. That's just because we have no light pouring, no highlights, anything on it. So at this point, it's just a flat, inanimate object. We're gonna give it some movement. It's gonna have that light popping off of it here in a little bit, and it's gonna come much more alive. But from where we started, I hope you guys can see we're starting to get a really nice shaped animal. I'm really liking it. It's really pretty, and if you're at this stage in a painting, and you've only got that much of a canvas covered, and you already like it, man, no telling what the end product's going to be like, because no painting ever looks good at this stage. few of these little pops of colors are about to go in. This is one of them right here. We're going to have the nose kind of transitions into the fur on the snout. So I've got to be careful not to keep too hard of an edge here. But I also want to get a strong light source because the sun is up high, and I do want him to shine. But I can always go back and detail this fella later. Again, sorry my hand is covering some of this, folks. I'm using a short handle liner, which I don't typically do. In fact, I got annoyed a couple of times during the painting process because I hate using short handle brushes for the most part. Now, while he's already looking good, I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of wet on wet touch up to this guy's face. and forehead here, just to drop in some colors. Believe it or not, wet on wet for me helps with animal portraits, especially animals with fur, because you can blend and you can create that effect of little bitty hairs all over the place and slight color changes here or there, and it's just easier for me to do it wet on wet. But I don't strive for that. You guys notice I've colored this in little blocks. I don't cover the whole thing with one color and then go back over it with another color. I don't do it that way. But if I see an area where I think I need a little slight color change, I'll go back in and paint it wet on wet. I'm still not done refining this guy, though. I probably will let him dry and then come back maybe in the third session, or I might do it in the second, depending on how dry it is. But I'm going to come back in and do some detailing and touch-ups to this guy. All right, the next spot we're going to work on can get you into big trouble. The entire mouth area can be a problem, especially on a portrait where the dog has its mouth open. I'm starting with the shadow of the tongue. I started this painting with a dark tone, so I'm going to just kind of keep that going here. I'm going to start with a dark shadow color under the tongue, lay in a basic little shape, try to keep it in a specific space. But it would be extremely easy to get this tongue really just almost one or two colors and run into a situation where you got this really beautiful dog and then this flat tongue. So we got to show some depth. He's going to have some teeth showing. He's going to have a little bit of slobber. This is a detailed area, and you're not going to be able to get that in one session. And we're not going to be able to paint it wet on wet. We're going to have to paint this mouth, get it as good as we can, and then let it dry, and then come back and touch it up after it's dry. In fact, I may have at one point here gotten the mouth a little bit too large, but I don't know for sure. I hadn't made that. I haven't, even at the time that I'm recording this, I haven't made that decision yet. So if you're at home and you're working on a portrait or even a landscape and you're not 100% sure, if you're kind of questioning whether or not something is looking quite right, if it's a little off, or maybe you're thinking, well, maybe that does look right, I don't know. Give yourself a few days. Like, let it sit there. Come in once a day and look at it. Or if you want to, sometimes I've done this, if I'm really struggling trying to make a decision about whether or not an area is too large or too small, what I'll do is I won't just come in and look at it once a day. I'll set it down, or I'll put it in a place, hang it up in a spot in a little drying area, and I will purposefully not look at it for a week. Just because when you come back and look at something, you've almost forgotten what it looks like. And I try my best not to take too many photos of a painting at any point in the process, because I have this bad habit of wanting then to look at my work on my phone. Well, that totally defeats the purpose of leaving it there for a week or a day and then coming back to look at it. You want to give yourself a break from that painting. The tongue here is going to be a mixture of the same white tone that I used on the snout, but I'm going to lighten it with titanium white, and I'm going to add some cad red deep. But I don't want to get this thing too red. I want it to be pinkish from the color that I've got, but I'm again staying neutral to some extent with it. I'm still using some pretty broad strokes though. I do maybe shorten them a bit here, but I'm concentrating on the shape of the tongue. I want the brush strokes to show a different texture than the fur, which is difficult to do if you're not paying attention to it. So just hang in there with it. You can always, again, go back over it. But that little bit of shadow color at the back of the tongue is, I really like that. That's a very important part of this mouth feature of this portrait. And I'm just really taking time to shape this tongue out the way I want it. It's crazy how that's changing this painting. Just that tongue is drastically altering the entire portrait. I've strengthened the brightness of the same color with just titanium white, and that little highlight there, just, man, that made that tongue pop. It's suddenly, believe it or not, it's got a lot of depth to it, even with that. You can see me in the window there scratching my head, kind of thinking about it a little bit. I liked it. Yeah, that's something, that's another little habit of mine. I'll kind of back up, scratch my head and go, yeah, it looks pretty good. You guys just get in on all my secrets and all my little quirks as a painter. I hope you enjoy it. I really hope you enjoy it. I hope I'm not too much of a nerd, but I like this stuff. It's fun, man. I spent a lot of time on the palette getting this back side of the mouth color correct. It's pink and red, but it's still, I'm still neutraling, creating a neutral tone out of it. Not getting it too terribly bright, but I do want to be careful with this part of the painting. Again, this mouth is not an easy skill to take on, and my initial sketch that I freehanded may be a little off. So I've got to take that into account too. I may not have nailed the sketch just right. So I've got to watch it as I paint it throughout the rest of this process. I've got to make sure I shape it correctly in the painting process, even more accurately than I did in the sketch. Um, and that is simply done by me looking at certain points. For instance, I'll look at the ear and the angle of the ear on that right side, and I'll go, okay, that line points at such and such angle. Where would that point end down here at the mouth? And that's where I need to start the turn of the mouth. It's hard to even describe how I handle it because there's probably another way to do it. But this is how I've done it. This is how I work it out. So it's just something that's you've got to build your own way. And if your way ends up being similar to my way, man, I'm glad I could help you out. But just don't get frustrated. This is not easy to do. Now, I've used a pretty basic color to that point. You can see I'm strengthening it with a little bit of Cad Red Deep now to try to give it some depth. But everything to this point in that mouth is really flat, other than the tongue. And obviously I'm going to have some dark colors, so I've got to be very careful. While I say I've got to be careful, I also can't be too timid. We go back to that whole thing about painting your first object or human or animal into a landscape. Be bold about it. I don't mean be cocky about it, but there's going to come a point in your painting career where you're going to say, okay, I want this in a painting. I've got to just do it. And you kind of have to be bullheaded about it and just say, I'm going to do it. And, I'm going to work on it and refine it until it looks right. The lighter white portion that's on the front of his snout also extends down onto the fur, kind of on the bottom portion of his jaw. There's a little bit of fur on the bottom, so I've got to get that in there, and I've got to make sure that I don't take it too low or take it too high. I've got to get this in the right spot. Now we're getting into real portrait work at this point. So far, a lot of it's been just mass spots of color. And while we're still doing that here, you got to refine it more. You've got to get more detailed with it. You've got to get more patient with it. I mentioned patience at the beginning of this painting. That doesn't change anywhere throughout the entire process. You must remain patient. You must hold back that urge to just start throwing stuff on without looking. You got to make sure that you get it right. Because this dog, he's got his own personality. He's got his own character. And when I take a painting on like this, to me, it's a disservice to the animal if I don't paint him. This is an individual. This is an individual dog, and he's more unique than anyone that's on the planet. He is the only one like him, and I want him to be this painting. I don't want any other dog. I don't want this to be a generic pointer. I want this to be this pointer. And that's all done with every one of these little bitty blocks of color. It all creates that character and personality that this guy carries around with him every day. Strengthening up the shadow color below the tongue, it's going to add a lot more depth. But I still want to have a gradual shift in some places, so I'm using a liner brush now. Starting work on the teeth that are able to be seen. They're going to be difficult. You got to get the shape right. You got to pay attention, obviously, to the numbers of teeth that are seen. But this is probably a part of the initial session one that I'm going to have to just realize, okay, I'm going to likely have to let this dry and then come back and do some refinement work on it later in session 2 or 3. But just see, he's already gaining so much character. Beautiful, beautiful dog already. I can't wait to keep working on him. He's just so he's not even that vibrant yet, and he's already vibrant. Does that make sense? Now, there's some shadow colors in here, but I'm going to paint the teeth in first. Try to get the teeth, because there's a gradual color shift. The front tooth's really pretty white, but notice it's the same color that I used on the lighter tone of the fur. It's really the same. In fact, I could have probably painted that tooth, but I'm gradually going to darken the teeth as they go back. There's only going to be three teeth shown, and they've got to be in the right place. And I'm using the upper lip turn, the bottom part of that turn. I'm using that as a reference point to the height of where the teeth should be within the mouth. Everything must be in a correct place, because you don't want the teeth whoppy jawed. You don't want a tooth hanging way out on the right side of his face. That wouldn't look right. You got to have it in the right spot, and you got to shade it correctly. Every day is a little bit different for me painting. I have told you guys in the past that I work my darndest to make sure that I don't have to use a maul stick. But you can see here, today I was feeling a little shaky, and this was an area that I was a little nervous about, so I was a little shakier than normal. So this is another good reason to paint the background last, because I can set my little pinky finger down in that dry area, and I can just paint away really with a really strong, firm, still, confident stroke at that point, because I've got that little pinky finger to be able to rest on. No shame in that, folks. Please don't worry about that. That's the steadiness of your hand is something you can develop later. I'm taking a ton of time on this mouth, on the kind of slobbery area of the mouth. The darker pink spot is kind of what I've been working on, and I've got the shadows right. Believe it or not, I've got the teeth pretty well. I'm going to do probably a little bit more refinement on them later, but they're not bad at all for first session. But this little area that I'm working on now, this pink spot is not the best. I've got some work to do there. It may be a little large. I may need to. I got to add a little bit of detailing, obviously. But I just, at this point, I've got to work on it, get it to as a point where it's as good as it possibly can be, and then after that, I can, after it dries, then I can really go back and detail it heavily. But I want to put myself in a good position for that detailing stage. I want to make the work as minimal as it has to be for the next session painting the dog. The underneath of his belly doesn't have quite as much fur on it, so I'm using a similar pink tone that I did in the mouth, believe it or not, to just kind of lay in this little bit of shadowy skin tone that he's got. You could. I'm not doing it on this portrait, but you could add a little dioxazine purple here and get away with it. That would be a nice little shadow tone, and I might even work on that in another session. But it's just a little pink tone right on the underneath of his belly, so I got that in. I think it's about time to start working on some white fur. He needs to start getting blocked in. His head is about as far as I can get it in session one. There may be a couple little things I'm going to do later to shapen him up a little bit more before session one ends, but this is coming along really nicely. Now it's just a matter of getting some fur blocked in. I'm going to start with the tail, believe it or not, for no other reason but the fact that I like his tail, and I want that to get in there as quick as possible. Probably also, if I get the tone a little bit too white, it's okay because that fur on the tail is a little bit thinner, so he's going to it's going to shine a bit more. So if I get the color too white, it's not a big deal. I can always either go over it again, or I can, it can be just good sunlight. As I bring these two colors together here, this is a fairly easy thing to do. Just kind of dragging the hairs together, it creates a really nice little transition effect. There's a transition, but it's not totally blended. You can still see hair, and I like that. Got a little bit of a strong one there, so I just pull back over it, and man, even that right there looks good. I'm touch it up a little bit more, but You know, that tail at this point is really close to being done. There's not going to be much more I have to do to that because it's not a focal point, but that looks really good. All right, I'm going to kind of be quiet for a little while and just let you guys watch as you can see me in the window. I'm really mixing my color. There's a lot of gradual changes. There's a lot of white tones that I'm about to drop in, but there are a lot of slight gradual changes. I work on getting that right, but at the same time, I'm leaving a lot of the total refinement for the last session. If that's session 2 or session 3, I don't know. We may not even have to have a session 3, but we're gonna for the most part here just work on getting a nice white color in for the fur, and I'm working on the shape again. Think about when you're petting a dog, where does the fur go naturally? If you're trying to pet a dog and you want it to be a smooth, if you want to pet him and him to be soft and smooth, you go with the fur. You don't go against it. You don't cut side across it. You go with it when you pet a dog. Um, and I'm trying to think about that on this animal. What direction is the fur going? Because that dictates where my brush strokes direction-wise need to go, and that creates the shape of the animal, along with the color transitions. I'm not using pure white. Again, not using pure white. I've got a lot of dark color on my palette from where I was working on his head, a lot of that liver color that I have mixed up. So what I'm basically doing every time I go back to the palette, I've got my titanium white in almost a pure form. I go up there with my brush and I just kind of dab it into that liver color. I get a good bit of it in there actually most of the time. But then I go back in and I mix that with the white, and it creates this really nice little soft, very soft white tone. It's a beautiful color. Here on the neck, chest area, kind of the front of the animal, you can tell I've got the sketch. I've got some lines drawn in there. That's indicating to me where the fur direction wise changes. So on the front of the animal here, it's kind of going side to side, and as it goes down further, it'll start to kind of turn down inwards towards the bottom of his body. But up here, it's a side to side type feel, and that's again just important to remember the brush strokes. And I'm not too worried yet about the transitions into those other colors, but where I worked on the back side of it, that's perfect. I'm not going to work on that much more. The transition on his hind end of the fur is pretty spot on. Okay, so at this point, just sit back, relax, and kind of watch me make these slight color adjustments and watch the direction of the brush strokes and again the broadness of the brush strokes as I finish out the white part of this dog. And then we'll discuss a little bit further after I finish that up what we're going to be doing to finish up making this guy a German Shorthaired. I do want to mention before we go too much further, you're probably looking and wondering, well, why didn't Rob finish painting that bottom side of that leg over there on the right, and is he going to do the same here in the front? Uh, I will probably paint them, but I'm not too concerned about that. There's going to be a lot of grass sticking up in the final stages of this, so a lot of his leg may disappear. I'm just not going to worry about painting that spot when I know grass is going to be going there. It's simply thinking ahead. Over here on this left side of the painting, we've got a big color shift for shadow. I'm using some pretty heavy ultramarine blue to get this color the way where I want it. But again, it's a mixture of that liver color mixed with white, ultramarine blue, maybe a little bit of red, but not much. But I'm just going to block this area in. Alright, for the most part he's blocked in. So I'm now, you can see in the mirror, I'm just kind of sitting back thinking a little bit. How much further I want to go, and do I want to do the next step with wet on wet? And I decide I do. Now these German Shorthairs, they have all these little dots on them. And they're really irregular shapes. It's kind of a peppery look. There's really no rhyme or reason to it, but it's a beautiful effect. Beautiful color, and it's the liver color that we used on the head. But it's lighter, so I just take that same color. I'm gonna just dot it into the mixture here in the white, and just randomly try to replicate the pattern that I'm seeing in the photo of the dog that I'm painting. And this is what makes this dog really stand out to me. I love this effect. I do have to be careful. Keep going with the fur. I can't I don't want to go against it. It's going to look weird if I go against it. So just watch as I dot in this little bit of liver color, and I want you to notice I don't overwork this effect. It's a pull and leave for the most part. as I start to paint into the shadows, because there's going to be a few little dots in the shadows, I do darken the color slightly just so it'll stand out in that shadow area a little bit more. But we're nearing the completion of session 1. So this dog is, the base coat of this dog is for the most part finished. And when he's done, he's going to look a lot like this. This is a great start. He's not going to get much better than this, but there is going to be a lot of highlights and little things that I do, little tweaks that I take on. And you'll even see one here that I saw at the end of this first session that I wanted to go ahead and do. But there's going to be some more. Session 2 obviously is going to be the background and getting all that done, but for the most part, this guy looks a lot like what he's going to look like when it's all said and done. And that's a big deal. If you can get that on the first try, first session, you're a good artist. And I hope you guys out there can learn something from what I've done in this video. And there's little things I'm probably going to throw some shadows in along his forward chest area. And obviously the grass is going to change a lot of that. He may be a little bit off balance in the front, but we can always alter that a little bit with the grass. I did add a little bit of darker color just to kind of add some randomness to these little dots and peppers. But again, I've used 2 brushes this whole painting so far. May use some different ones for the background, but we'll just kind of see how that goes. Few little touch-ups now that I'm kind of spotting. I've got a little bit of this undertone canvas showing through. Now, it's not a big deal if you leave that undone because you've toned it. That's a big plus. If you've toned the canvas beforehand, if you have a little bitty grainy spot that's not covered up, it's not the end of the world because you've got it painted technically, and you're getting some natural color through anyway. It's not a huge deal. But if you got a big area, cover that up. Make sure for the most part it's blocked in. I'm going to add a slightly different color right here at the tail base just to separate that tail from his rear. And that little stroke alone right there made that 10 times better. So much better for it. I love it, and man, tells you how just a little stroke can change a painting. I did notice towards the end, I couldn't really see it because of the grass that was in my photo, but I look at this and I go, oh wait, his back leg should be there, so I've got to paint that in. I just took some soft iron charcoal and and drew it in first so that I knew I could just block that in. But I'm going to use one flat color. Again, a lot of grass is going to be over this area, so I'm not too concerned with anything other than just getting a basic flat shape put in back here, just so it looks like he's not three-legged. This is a deep shadow color that I'm using. I may darken that color a little bit more later, but we'll just kind of see how that goes. The transition, I almost stepped away and just said, okay, I'm done for this session. But when I stepped back and looked at it, the nose or the snout to the eye or head part of the transition area didn't look like it was exactly right. So I did want to go ahead and drop in a little highlight underneath his eye. And this is going to create a little bit of a surface look where the sun's hitting that place where his forehead turns into the snout. And I'm using just my liner brush for this, and that same little light colored liver, very light. It's probably more than anything, but I don't have much paint on the brush. I'm just kind of gliding that in there, and see that little shape there just created a ton more depth to this. I'm going to do the same thing over here on the right. You can't see his eye on that other side, but the shaping still needs to be, done correctly so the snout kind of works back up into the forehead. All right, hope you guys enjoyed this. That's going to be it for session 1. Join me for session 2, which is going to be the background of this painting. Thank you for joining me, though. Keep painting, and God bless.